Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Thanks again for joining me this morning or evening or whatever time it is, wherever you may happen to be or whenever you may happen to be seeing this. Please make sure you do subscribe, whatever that time may be, to imixwhatilike.org and and follow at I Mix What I Like on all your relevant social media. And please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel, and even joining the channel, because as I keep teasing, on the 17th of this month, in celebration of Black History, Black Power, Dr. Huey P. Newton's birthday, the channel will be announcing an evolution that your support will greatly help. You've already seen a little bit of what that might look like, as I'm sure you have all by now seen and shared and supported and talked about the first episode of The Last Dope Intellectual featuring Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, debuted last Friday. Its next edition is going to come this next Friday, 7 o'clock Eastern on the channel. So anyway, a lot more coming along those lines as well. And similarly, before we get to our guest, I just want to let folks know that coming up later today, there's a lot actually happening on this channel later today. First and foremost, after our discussion with our next guest, there's going to be, we're going to be hosting a conversation with V. Bravo, a longtime filmmaker, activist, hip hop head, journalist. I'm going to be talking about the Chilean uprising and revolution and his work in Rikers prisons, doing media and hip hop and organizing, and talk a little bit about how all of that relates to a lot of what we talk about here. So stick around for that. Then, of course, after that, we have at 5 o'clock Eastern time today, we have the first in our month-long series of Black Studies Matters, the meaning and mission of Black Studies. So please come back as we talk about that, or to begin that series with Drs. Kido Swan and Iyeli Ichile. And then, of course, later this month, we are on the 15th going to continue that series, again, right here at this channel, with the Liberation Suite, a sound clash of emancipatory Black music, a battle that is involving those I've already mentioned, Drs. Mark Bolden and Otis Williams of Bowie State, who are part of this collaborative for Black Studies Matters. This series, they'll be involved. Who's got the best track for track? Dr. Ichile assures us she is going to win. I'm not so sure about that, but we're going to see. So you can join us for that as well. And then on February 22nd, we are going to have an earlier in the day than normal for this series, a Black Revolutionary Masculinity on Screen discussion with our brothers, Ellie and Kevin Bismarck-Cobham, I believe, from Africans Arise, coming back with that Pan-African look, and then several others are going to be involved with that as well. And it's going to culminate on March 1st, where we sort of blend an end of Black History Month with the beginning of Women's History Month, with a Black Studies Matters panel around Black women's history. That will, of course, again, also be back at 5 o'clock and right here on this channel, 5 p.m. Eastern, that is, and will involve one of my new colleagues at Morgan State University, Dr. Debnam, who her work focuses on the history of African people in this country and enslavement. So I look forward to that as well. So she'll be part of that panel, as will several others. So please stick around for that. But again, tonight is the inaugural beginning of that series, The Meaning and Mission of Black Studies. So please, again, come on back for that as well. By the way, just announced, I'm happy that later this month, Marcel P. Black is going to be joining me, one of my favorite MCs, talking about his new album, In Search of a Black Messiah. So anyway, a lot more coming up. You can find out all about that at the channel at mixwithilike.org as well, and so on. One other thing, though, before we get to our next guest that I just wanted to highlight is we continue to talk about political prisoners here on this channel. Specifically, and I've already put it in the description for this show, the Freedom Archives prisoner newsletter has just come out again, talking about this, which is an update on the campaign to free former Black Panther Party leader Ed Poindexter, who the campaign of which is apparently and hopefully gaining support, as evidenced by a new billboard near Interstate 480 in Omaha, Nebraska, from where, of course, Poindexter comes and is imprisoned, calling for his freedom. Poindexter has been imprisoned since 1970 for the bombing murder of an Omaha policeman following a controversial trial marred by withheld evidence, apparent planted evidence, conflicting police testimony, questionable forensic evidence, and perjured testimony by the state's chief witness, Dwayne Peak, the confessed bomber. So I put a link in the description so you can continue reading that story. I've also put a link to Freedom Archives where you can sign up for their newsletter and so much more. So please consider checking that out. And by the way, that was a very polite rendition of a description of his case, by the way. It is, as is the case with so many of these political prisoners, it is unconscionable and indefensible that at minimum they don't have new trials or are just not, entirely set free, and to the extent possible made whole with a whole bevy of reparations and apologies from the state and federal government. But anyway, without that said, we'll of course continue to cover that and come back to that. I'm very happy to talk with our next guest, who I will say several of you have asked me to invite on, and I think it's pretty cool the ways in which our just have to let that one go. There was a little glitch with my little setup, unfortunately, but I was actually interested, at least at minimum, if not just, enjoying the overlap, so to speak, in what I often assume are the political spaces that I and those of us who would tune into this operate in. So I'm going to start with asking him about this, but many years ago, I came across our next guest while he was working with Cynthia McKinney during her 2008 Green Party presidential campaign run, and was very interested in this cat and have followed his work ever since. And again, I was very interested that many of you, or at least several of you, have said, hey, man, why don't you have this guy on? And in fact, I am talking about Don DeBar, who is the senior producer of CPR News, a daily Monday through Friday 30-minute radio news program. I've put the link to where that's available in the description as well. Tune in at 6 a.m. Eastern time every Monday through Friday to get that news and more. Music and discussion of events of the day from a progressive perspective. DeBar has also run for office as a Green several times and has worked on a number of Green campaigns over the last 15 years and is a regular political commentator on a number of non-U.S. mainstream commercial media outlets. So I'm happy to have him join us here. Don, welcome to the program. Good morning. Thanks for joining me.
Jared, thanks a lot. I guess we go back now. Now you start doing the calculus of how long we've known each other. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, again, for me at least, and relatively speaking, I'm late to the game, but I would like us to actually start there if you don't mind, because there was a brief time where as I was sort of fading out my own I had started running for the nomination of the Green Party in 2007, president, and when Cynthia joined, it was kind of a no-brainer, particularly when she picked up Rosa Clemente, for me to just step back and try to support that work. And we crossed paths while, on that campaign trail, so to speak. And you're a memorable character, to say the least. So ever since then, I sort of followed your work, and then we've also crossed paths, whether it's through Pacifica Radio or the Green Party, whatever. So I want to ask you about all of that. But if we could, let's start with the Cynthia McKinney campaign. And I wanted to just sort of ask, looking back on that campaign, whatever you would want to say is cool, but I'm thinking, what does that experience and that campaign say about our current political climate and the world we find ourselves in today?
Okay. That's a big one, actually. Let me see if I can wrap my head around it, because there were a lot of moving parts then, and the final calculus when the vote count came in actually sort of stunned me. But we're talking about a period when, starting in 2007, but really coming to 2008, every day, first of all, you're hearing about a bank that failed. The economy was tanking. The stock market numbers, as an indication, meager as it is for working people, was showing not just distress, but almost panic in the financial sector, and people were going into foreclosure massively, losing their jobs all over the place. The retail sector was tanking, and they were looking at a depression on the order of the Great Depression of 1929. In the midst of this, we had really, it kind of happened with not much commentary in the public space, at least the corporate public space, but the little invasion of Iraq that was supposed to really be an opportunity to get flowers thrown at some of our soldiers and then bring a heroic democracy to those poor oppressed people under the heel of Saddam Hussein was still raging 4 years later, despite all of the wisdom of Bush and Kerry and everyone else in between. The people here were starting to panic, really. First of all, their personal economic and financial situations, went from, moderately optimistic at best for at least some portion of the population to everyone looking at doom just ahead. Even the big retail, the malls were going into foreclosure, which is, pretty interesting symbol of the things that were going on. At this point in time, suddenly out of this herd of candidates for the Democratic nomination, including Hillary Clinton, who everyone thought was the heir apparent at the time, the black guy in the middle of it is not only the front runner, he ends up being the nominee and winning the election. In that climate, because I mentioned this only because it was so historically unprecedented, and then just happened almost matter of factly, because the background was so radically just chaotic. I don't know. That these things looked like, who's going to be president, what color are they, all of that, ignored the actual hundreds of years of history and started to look like finery, while the real stuff, the economic distress everyone was facing, the fact of this war all of a sudden becoming permanent and expanding it elsewhere, these things started to really scare the hell out of a lot of people. I thought that the Green Party, first of all, I've had a great deal of respect for you from the almost the get-go, because of the way you handled your campaign when Cynthia entered the campaign. If it were me doing it, coming into it, and I saw that she came in recognizing her stature among people that you would think would be inclined to vote for a progressive candidate. And so in terms of the power that someone could bring to this cause, and then she herself, for all of the work that she'd already done, I would like to think also that I would gracefully not only step aside, but try to find a way to support the candidacy in a way that was meaningful and useful. And you did that. I was like, this guy's got class. I really have to say, I was very impressed meeting you under those circumstances, by the way you handled that. And
well, I appreciate that, but again,
that,
just real quick, it was easy. I mean, it was an easy decision to make. I mean, so if the goal is to win and to advance the ideas, but I appreciate that. Anyway, I just wanted to make that clear.
That's for me. That told me that's exactly what your agenda was. Mm-hmm. Your agenda wasn't, gee, I'm going to get my name out there so I can, sell a few books or, get my little 501c3 humming or whatever people get out of running these glamour campaigns, basically. Instead, there are people that are actual revolutionaries, basically, looking at this is a way to put on the public agenda because we can't buy advertising and we don't have 3,000 people that canvass neighborhoods with clipboards or whatever ways that the other guys get all their information out. This way we can put people's needs in front of them to the extent we can get it out there and have them, experience the dissonance between, oh yeah, I'm not crazy. I do need those things and you ain't getting them. So it's an important, one of the few mass devices that revolutionaries have to communicate some message to the body politic in the United States, and they're very important, even though the impact may not be quite the same as the Democrats and Republicans have with billion-dollar budgets. It's a way of at least speaking the unspoken otherwise, and within the context of people being told they have a democratic choice that they can make, and it's over the fundamental issues of their lives. So I think it's very important. And again, I was really impressed with it, and I'm not trying to blow smoke over this. That was something that was very unusual in my experience in my life, just with lots and lots of folks that style themselves as revolutionaries, and so I appreciated that, and I do appreciate it.
No, keep going. But I unfolded to your answer if you would, because one little follow up I had to all of this is what are, or maybe a rephrasing is, are there lessons from that experience of working with her on that campaign that is Cynthia on that campaign, and are there experiences from that campaign that maybe a lot of people are not aware of that you think they should be aware of when they reflect on either that campaign or these kinds of politics in general?
Yeah, there were a number of things. First of all, I had no idea how weak, in essence, the organizational structure or the thing itself, the Green Party, actually is, and conflicted, contradicted internally. For example, the Democratic Convention was held, as you know, in Denver. That's where Obama was anointed. And there was a group looking at the landscape, looking at what Obama was already saying he was going to do if he was elected, drawing an analogy to 1968 when the people were in the streets over the Vietnam War in Chicago, and the police beat the hell out of the protesters, and the protesters fought back, and they called themselves Recreate 68. Now, there was a, sort of a PR kick that went to that, kind of a rad, kind of chic thing that went with it. Like, yeah, we're going to kick some pigs' behinds, or whatever. But that wasn't really it. What was it was we were going to get in the streets and we're going to make our demands, and we're not going to get cowed by, people, beating up on us or whatever. We're going to be heard. And so that was used by the Denver mayor at the time, who's now, he's the governor of this state, the U.S. senator from Colorado, John Hickenlooper,
right,
and some of the other local politicians to say, we're going to put the police out there very aggressively. We're not tolerating any of this, aggressive talk from radical maniacs who want to come destroy our peaceful town in the midst of this democratic, celebration, yada, yada, yada. And they staked out territory, basically trying to marginalize the protesters in advance, imposing all kinds of restrictions on their ability to protest. And that actually led to even more oppressive stuff in St. Paul for the Republican convention a week later. But anyway, and so what happened was Cynthia, of course, embraced some of the protesters, the leaders and organizers of this, as a part of the group that were hosting the protest of the DNC. We're talking about, for example, the group itself, R68, and you had Ward Churchill, and just a number of local revolutionaries, radicals, lefties, and then some national organizers of the protests. Well, anyway, on the Sunday of the week that the convention was taking place, and it actually opened Monday night or Tuesday morning, running till Friday. The Sunday morning at the state capitol in Denver, they had a protest, an event, speakers, the whole bit, a rally. And a number of these people were there. Ward Churchill was one. Another was that guy that was in the Vietnam movie that Richard Dreyfuss played, in the crippled Vietnam veteran who's a famous anti-war.
Are you talking about the Tom Cruise movie?
Yeah, Tom Cruise. Excuse me.
Yeah, Born on the 4th of July. Yeah. Ron Coop.
Ron Coop, that's right. And, Cindy Sheehan, a bunch of people, and a lot of them under the banner are 68. Others not. Just this one stage with people. I represent this. You represent that. She represents this. We're here to tell the world we're not having it. We're tired of war. We're tired of poverty. We're tired of capitalism. We're tired of you. We ain't having it anymore. Basically that message that all of us have been communicating in one form or another for decades. Well, the word came down from some of the genteel folks in the Green Party in Colorado that Cynthia was not to have any further contact with these people, that the Green Party's values include peace, that rabble-rousing radical maniacs do not represent that value, and you, as our representative, will not have any contact with them. Of course, Cynthia handled that in the only appropriate way, only she didn't use the words I would have. All of her words could be broadcast, and none of the ones I would have can be. And so, but she basically said, sorry, I don't follow instructions like that. And especially, I don't agree with the, political perspective that's being represented here, but I'm not just somebody you can tell what to do. I'm an actual independent human being with my own thoughts and ideas on it. I am your candidate. This is how I'm doing it. So there were people in the Green Party that then tried to have her removed from the ballot in Colorado, Nevada, and either Washington or Oregon.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, it was crazy. Your own nominee, you're trying to remove from the. It's just ridiculous.
So around the time of the Green Party convention, which was a month earlier in July in Chicago, I sat with Cynthia with a few people. You might have even been there. And we were looking at, okay, how do we do this? How do we mobilize across the 50 states or whatever? And how do we get a message out? What do we do for a media? And so I was looking at then the Green Party officials, the state structures. That a lot of them had web pages at that point. We're talking 2008. It's not so long ago. It's 13 years. So we could find contact points, email addresses, phone numbers, things for pretty much almost all of them. And also the same with media. Now, just as an aside, I remember when Amy Goodman was putting Democracy Now! Together as an actual separate entity from the WBAI News. This is like 20 years ago now. And one of the things that she did to organize that, she and her brother wrote a book. I don't remember what it was about, and I don't know if I ever read it, to tell you the truth. But they wrote a book. They went on a book tour that was promoted through local radio stations, college radio stations, Pacifica affiliates, and public access TV stations. Now, this is before really anyone had formed public access TV stations as a whole network. They're just individual cells, basically. No one really had tried to thread them together, or anyone had that I've noticed had ever done it. She went out on book tours, essentially self-financing book tours that went from station to station to station to station. And behind her, everywhere she left, not everywhere, but lots of the places she left, they were now going to carry her program. The college stations, the independent stations, the Pacifica affiliates, and public access TV stations, and they started producing a television version of the news program. This was really humming by 2008. And so it occurred to me that one of the things we could do is something similar. Look at public access TV stations as a resource, produce video content, and find ways of distributing it over the internet, because they weren't obvious at that point yet. Working with the Alliance for Community Media, for example, which was an organization that public access stations were members of, so they had the lists, contacts, and infrastructure for doing this, and use that to push out message, and use the Green Party structure to do the footwork, the groundwork in each of these places. It was impossible to get any Green Party official anywhere to take any step towards doing the other work. There were a couple people who would help produce the content. Craig Seaman in New York was one, for example. Whatever. Tell me where to point the camera and I'll send you a file, tomorrow morning. A few other people like that. But what seemed like an apparent set of assets for this campaign, for me looking on the outside, as I have been, for the previous 50 years or whatever in my life, all of a sudden I realized it's an illusion. That stuff's not really there. I don't know if the people that are populating these seats are actual human beings or if they're cardboard cutouts like the ones that go to the Super Bowl now, and so what my lesson was, my takeaway in the short version was that the infrastructure of the left is sorely lacking. And it's not just what's apparent is insufficient. What's apparent is not even there in terms of utility. Mm-hmm. And so we have a lot of work to do to get from where we are to having a really minimal voice. And that is why I'm particularly distressed at our losing voices now, as if we had plenty to spare, instead of rapidly adding infrastructure to our ability to fight.
And what do you mean by who is the we that's losing these voices, and what do you mean by these voices that are being lost?
Well, me, first of all, I'm just one. Mm. The entire mediascape has changed, as you know. This is your field, better than I do. Over the last 20, 30 years, certainly since the 96 Telecom Act, but even before that, the economics that drove the 96 Telecom Act were already in place at that time, obviously, that had been building for a while. Concentration of ownership, doing away with the fairness doctrine and all the various things that were supposed to be counterweights to capitalism's tendency towards monopoly in terms of communications, human communications. People, it's like they say fish don't know they're in water because they're in water all the time. Same with us. We're in a sea of gases. We don't know that because we've always been. The mediascape, as it was and as it is not the only model possible. This now is a big issue with, say, Facebook and Twitter and other social media suddenly deciding that they're going to be the arbiter of what can be published, not just what can be shared in which ways, and monkeying with different algorithms to keep this away from them and that away. They've been doing that, and there hasn't been any public discussion about it of any weight. But also just whether you're allowed to have a voice at all. To me, for example, when 3 private corporations can shut down the sitting president of the United States without a single vote being taken by anyone anywhere in the 3 major media platforms, across the social media scape, that to me indicates that there is a center of power somewhere that is more or less gatekeeping human communication, because almost the whole human race is hooked up to those things now. That has, nobody voted for them, and no one has been consulted on an agenda for what gets passed and what doesn't get passed. And they're at the same time insulated from liability, as if they were exercising no control at all from the consequences of what comes out under their control. Different models, for example, the telephone. Okay, AT&T, ITT, whoever the hell was the monopoly at the end of the monopoly phase of that. They built a network, they operated the network, they put a phone in your house, they robbed you blind, as all of us. That's what capitalists do best. But they provided this communications tool. I could call you, you could call her, she could call him, we could talk to each other. Maybe somebody's listening on the other line, but nobody's saying, no, you can't say that. Or you can't call her because that's bad. Or you can't talk to them because they're leftists or rightists or in-betweenists or whatever. There's no mediation of the content. That's the point. None. It's entirely between, the participants. And the only service being provided is what they characterize in the business as a common carrier. I am providing the wires and the hardware and the operating system for you to communicate with each other. Farewell. Have a good time. Don't break.
I mean, it would be as others have put it, like if airlines and trains made you pass like an ideology test before you were allowed to board.
Yeah.
Nobody says, you can't get on board even with a valid ticket because we don't like your politics, or because now they will tell you can't go on board and scream there's a bomb on the plane.
Right.
But that's because there's a law in place to prevent that. But even with the president that nobody liked, if he breaks a law, then legally remove him or punish him as the law says. But this idea, as you point out, that corporations could just, without a vote, without a discussion, remove him or anyone, as is already the case, is increasingly, as what everybody could predict or should be able to predict, is now being increasingly targeted towards the so-called left, all of the censorship. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
For me, for example, only an idiot doesn't see right away. If they could do that to the president of the United States, I guess they could do it to me too. And that would give rise to, to some caution, like, oh, Jesus, that's not good. So, we have that kind of stuff going on right now. You've got almost every public event that takes place, you can see unanimity, from so-called left to so-called right. The same line is taken on Fox News and Democracy Now! And it's the same line that'll come out of the spokespeople from, the Republican and Democratic parties. And even where there's a contest between them on a particular issue, the fundamental container of all of it is the same, even though the reality of it might be that that container is a crock of nonsense and there's an entirely different game being played, and the media is being the media is conducting a manipulation of the public discourse in order to have a particular outcome, come to fruition. So this was, I saw this. I remember noticing back in it was like 1990 and 91 when they were running up to the first Iraq War. There were these moments when all of a sudden, we had now cable. I grew up with 7 TV stations until cable came around in the late 70s, early 80s, where I am. And suddenly you have 50, 100 TV stations. When all of the TV stations, all of the news stations, all of the commercial stations in general were carrying the same program and carrying the same line about how it was absolutely necessary to go in and blow up Iraq now. It was an interesting pivot in the way the media was being used here. It was a change. It was a substantive change. And I saw it again a few times during Clinton's term, and then certainly 9/11, where even HBO and Showtime and everyone there was that TV show they had where all the actors and musicians and whoever they could scrape up all got on a stage talking about wonderful America and all this crap for a day or whatever. It was on every station. It was on like 2 through 300 or whatever on my TV set. This is a remarkable, I think about Goebbels, for example, and what he had to work with. Radio, low frequency tones to agitate people, costumes, buntings and whatnot. And I'm thinking, how about microcasting to 300 TV stations in high definition, the same message, but microcast to each sub audience, and have complete and total monopoly control over it, which is what they have now. And against that, we've got impotence in 2008 and a deterioration of that since, and an actual hostile environment that's really coming to fruition now with like I said, with these mega corporations doing the Facebook and Twitter, etc. purges.
And similarly, even as we're on YouTube, also, I mean, YouTube is a major problem in that as well.
Yes, Google.
Google, demonetizing and deplatforming and throttling and all that kind of stuff, people's content. Yeah. But it seemed like you were initially drawing the parallel that I'd like to just quickly come back to between what you were describing between the what was lacking in the Green Party left political media structure, and what I also wanted to ask you about was you talked about Amy Goodman, but to me she's in Democracy Now! Is symbolic of sort of overall what's happened with Pacifica, which itself is maybe a metaphor for something else. So for those who may not be aware, I mean, I'll just quickly say Pacifica was this post-Second World War white progressive left radio network meant to offer voices and space that as their archives will attest, was a great support to a lot of different Black and other liberation struggles. There's a tremendous trove of audio that they still have over the decades. And then Amy Goodman emerges with Democracy Now! At a certain point, and I mean, I'm even remembering the whole. I mean, she was more of Amy was more of a minor player at the time, but I remember even the big arguments with Utrice Lead and the whole. I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on with Pacifica.
I remember.
But maybe talk a little bit about from your perspective, and it ends up with you and others leaving or being pushed out, however people want to describe it. Fired as others. That's correct. And those of us, myself including, who were volunteers, a lot of us struggled or ended up walking away for whatever reasons over time. So anyway, what would you say, or how would you describe that experience or that history? And maybe again, what does it say about where we are today?
Look, what is the role of dissident media in a society that is trying to find its way towards fundamental change? We have an example of what was done to the USSR. You had it from the outside, the same geniuses that have been brainwashing us for the last 70, 80 years or whatever, were beaming in every signal that they could, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and yada, 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 from the outside. But the people on the ground inside had two real methods of spreading propaganda. One was what they called samizdat, just paper, basically, mostly like on a like a subway stall or a bus stop or whatever, some public gathering place. There'd be 2, 3, 4 pages of comments or stuff for that day, and the other was through cultural warfare, music particularly, Western music particularly, and this was done through something called Bones. You had socialist economics in Soviet Union, and communications like record companies. There's no need for competition, so there was a large producer of records, and you just you go in through the channels that you go in through, but they didn't have competition. They just had Melodia. So, well, what happened was Melodia did some gatekeeping, of course, ideologically, and hi, I want to play some music and sell some music that's going to bring down the socialist government. No, sorry, take that somewhere else. And so what they started doing was burning records on the material that they could get their hands on. They got little machines, no idea where they came from, and they burned them on X-rays, and they started calling the underground records, and made a whole little underground music scene and a subculture, Bones. So it was very low scale. That's the point. And I'm not saying that the situation is akin, because you had the full power of the global capitalist economy focusing on the Soviet Union, while it was also being starved out of the global economy, taxed, forced to have a huge military for defense, all of this. But even the smallest scale propaganda operation, like I just described, can be part of a successful mix. And that's in the awareness, I believe, of the people who own this thing here. So when you talk about a national radio network with 5 stations in major market cities, there are 4 in major market cities and 1 in Houston, and then 100 or 200 affiliate stations producing content, sitting on top of the archives that they have that prove that these guys were lying 20 years ago and 30 and 40 or 50 years ago. Control of that particular resource is a fundamental question for those who want to retain power. And so it has always been a target of mischief making by the power elite. The Clinton types, Democrats, the old DLC Democrats, Mary Frances Berry, those folks took over they had a coup in like 1999 where this group took over management, and they fired a whole bunch of lefties. And that's the period you're talking about, where Patrice Lee took over the station in New York City, and Amy Goodman was fired. So a bunch of others were fired. And so when that happened, people get their reputation for their politics and such by where they stood then. But you got to watch people's development over time, and more, you got to watch what they do, not who they supposedly are and what they're doing at the moment. For me, Democracy Now! Lost me first over the things that were happening in Georgia, in Russia, back in 2006, 2007, and in Ukraine at that time also, where, and Pacifica, I always said, qualms about their position on Soviet Union and China and all of that, going back for as long as I was listening, since I was 20 years old or whatever. I always thought it was a reactionary position. I always thought a lot of it could have been designed in Langley and perhaps was. Who knows? But when I saw that Democracy Now! Was reporting on what was happening in Georgia and Ukraine as if they were some sort of democratic uprising against, the stale, cold hand of the old communist dictators, they completely lost me, because I knew it was a crock of nonsense. And then coming forward in 2010 in Cote d'Ivoire, when Ouattara came to power basically at gunpoint with the French Foreign Legion and the French army, kicking Gbagbo out of the presidential palace. And this was treated by Democracy Now! As if it were the fulfillment of a democratic election, even though the Constitutional Court said no. That also lost me. But really, coming into 2011, now I had gone with Cynthia to Tripoli. You did one of those trips too, right?
No. I turned down the opportunity.
Yeah,
depending on the day, I go. I either understand my choice or really regret the choice. But
you can't do everything.
Can't do everything.
So I remember your name being mentioned, but I went to Tripoli with her and Glenn Ford, the Keith Harmon Snow, like maybe a dozen people, journalists. And I was honored. I was like, what am I doing with these people? These are some heavy people. But we went and we saw what Libya really, really was, and then came back, and like within a year, plus 3 months or whatever, I was there October 20th to 25th or something in 2009. The U.S. was at the UN in February 2011 saying, we have to kill Libya. The Obama administration came to the UN saying, in essence, there's an uprising, part of the Arab Spring, that's bringing democracy across the Arab world, which is how they were covering it. Democracy Now! Was covering it. And she had on someone from, I forget, it was from Libya or from Egypt, somewhere, or the other one, Tunisia, next to it, and said that the Air Force has been strafing protesters. At first, it occurred to me, who's protesting in Libya? Here's Libya. The oil revenue was used for the people there. They had a revolution in 1969. It was one of the poorest countries in the world. It was the poorest country in Africa. In the 50s and 60s, it was the poorest country in the world by every measure. After the revolution in 1969, Gaddafi, who was the leader of the revolution, said, I'm not going to live in a house. I'm not building a presidential house, nothing, until everyone else has a home here. And they made it a project that every Libyan will have their own home, own it, free and clear, no mortgage, no rent, no property taxes. You get a home. That's a human right. They do that.
So it's not just even ending homelessness, which we can't get done here.
Right.
It's making sure that not only is everybody housed, but they actually own it free and clear.
Everyone
That's right. You just want to highlight that point. It's not just homelessness or housing. It's actually making sure you own it and nobody, anyway, sorry. Go ahead, please.
This is not a low-cost housing project patched together with a sticky voucher and go hustle some money up doing stuff that you're not allowed to do in the apartment. Okay, this is, here's your home, enjoy it as a Libyan. And that's funded by the oil revenues under the concept that the people own Libya and the people own the oil. And so when we sell it, we're really brokering it on behalf of the people. The money is theirs, and we're going to spend it on their necessities and then on their luxuries if there's anything left. And so first they do that. Then they decide free education for everyone from, kindergarten through postgraduate school, anywhere that you can get admitted to in the world. So if you sit there and take the entrance exam to Harvard and get in, they pay for Harvard. They pay for a place for you to live. They know you don't want to go live in Cambridge all by yourself. Maybe your mom and dad want to go live there too. They pay for them too. And they go there. And I've met people when Cynthia did a Libya tour after the bombing started. I went to a college up in Massachusetts, in Northampton, and I met several students who were there with their families on this program. This actually exists. So that's the scale of, they build their own world-class colleges and university. And like I said, they pay for any Libyan that can get admitted anywhere, that they'll pay for them to go. Also, healthcare, the same. They build infrastructure. So they build hospitals as good as, say, any of the suburban hospitals you'll see, in say around outside Baltimore, or outside New York, up here, whatever. And if you need something, you need to go to New York Presbyterian, or to DeBakey Center for a transplant or whatever. They pay for that, and again, they send support. Your family goes with you if that's what you need. And then finally, you folks, well, the gas, of course, is extremely cheap because it's theirs. Nobody's going to make money on selling themselves their own gas. And, oh, by the way, you're probably going to need a couple bucks in your pocket. So let's divvy up a percentage of the profits at the end of the month and send everybody a check. And this comes like $2,000-$3,000 a household. So that's what's going on. I find this out while I'm in Libya. I'm talking to people on the street. I'm not.
And how much is that check that everybody's arguing about now that nobody's getting?
Yeah,
1,400, right. I think.
So yeah, right here, 600. Yeah, whatever.
600. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, there. Okay, they're talking about protesters. I'm saying, what protesters? Who the hell's protesting in Libya? Everybody, you get a free house, free healthcare, free education, and money in your pocket. The only thing that might protest is they don't have alcohol. I heard about it when I was there. I was asking around too.
That would have me in the streets too, right?
Yeah,
with my sign, give me my booze.
But so they lost me there, and over the whole life of the whole life of that war. I mean, they started bombing. I think it was March 20th. That's when he announced it anyway. And they stopped on October 20th. That was the day they killed Gaddafi. So you're talking 7 months. Now, they bombed. They did every city. Libya had a population, I think, of 6 million at the beginning of the war, and now it's like 4 million. There's people of like, so yeah, maybe a dozen cities. Tripoli had a population of about 1.5 million to 2 million people at the time. So Cynthia was in Tripoli. She went on a couple fact-finding trips during the bombing. One was at the invitation of the African Union. And so she is in early June in Tripoli, sitting with the inspectors from the African Union, and calls me up on the phone. She's got a sat phone and says, you want to record an interview? I'll tell you what's going on here. I said, yeah, okay. So that's my YouTube page. If you type, my YouTube page is youtube.com/Don DeBar, DonDebar. It's one word. If you search at that YouTube page for Tripoli, one of the things you'll see is this interview, which was in June of 2011. Cynthia's on the ground in Tripoli with these guys from the African Union. She's telling me that over the last 12 hours, they counted 83 explosions in Tripoli. 83 bombs dropped on Tripoli on this one day. The bombing again went on for 7 months. Every day was like a 12-hour window that they would bomb it, and they did it to just about every city. I'll go back. The population was of the country 6 million, and 2 million in Tripoli, 1.5 million, 2 million in Tripoli. So these other cities are, 300,000, 400,000, 250,000, 500,000. But Tripoli has about the same population as the island of Manhattan. Manhattan's about 2 million people. And we're talking about 83 explosions in one day, each having the, of the scale of one of those planes hitting the World Trade Center. And that going on every day, 83 times for 7 months. And if you go look at Democracy Now!'s website and type in Libya, look at every report from March 20th, 2011 through October 20th, 2011. And I'll tell you what, take a look at it even through today. You will never see anything that describes this thing in the way I just described it. And I just related the facts of it.
Mm. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, we could talk a long time about that, but I get about Amy Goodman and Democracy Now!. But I think that again, it's indicative of broader trends and problems that still exist. So that was one reason why I wanted you to I'm just showing a little clip from your YouTube channels. I don't think the exact one you're talking about, but
yeah.
The one other question I wanted you to address a little bit before I'll go back and see if there are any comments or questions in the chat. But is that a lot of your work, as we've already heard you talking about, is focused on international news, and I'm wondering why you think that it's important to bring in a discussion of international news and politics to your local or reporting here from the United States.
I think it's essential. There's an illusion among people in the United States, and this goes across every subgrouping that you could imagine, either that exists or that you could construct or allege. And that is that whatever problem people have here can be solved without reference to what this country is doing in the rest of the world. I'll talk, for example, first say Bernie Sanders and quote unquote socialism. There cannot be socialism in the United States when the United States is an imperial power. There is not, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs, when the stuff being handed out was stolen from someone else who was then murdered. All right, that's not socialism. That's something else. What that is essentially is a replication of the system that people suffer under here. Here, they come to our communities and take all their money back to some bank somewhere or whatever and count it or play with it or sleep with it or whatever the hell it is they do. We all suffer, and there's a small group of them that get to share it. Well, to keep us quiet, they hire some of us or draft us or whatever and give us guns and send us places to steal other people's stuff. And then some of it spills off on the way back, on the way to their table, and we get some of it. And that keeps us quiet. And the more equitably we distribute that, goes the fantasy, the more equitable a society we have. You can say the same thing, for example, about race. This is something that on Facebook, some people have wanted to, string me up or whatever, but the statement of fact is, and I've raised it only as a question usually, but once in a while as a statement of fact. By handing over Africa to the Pentagon, is there anyone else that you could name who has been a bigger supporter in material terms of white supremacy than Barack Obama? People see electing a black president as an advancement. But if the advancement was that he was able to secure military domination of Africa for another 50 years or whatever, was that really an advancement? Because people here aren't looking at, they'll quote Malcolm X and every damn body else to you about, solidarity and Pan-Africanism and all of that. But you don't see any of those folks protesting the invasion of Libya or Cote d'Ivoire or what's been going on, since like 1960 in Congo and, that whole region really. And so it's just, this is allowed because people are just ignorant of what's going on. How can you call Donald Trump a fascist or a Nazi and support someone who installed actual Nazis? They have their own swastikas and goose step and everything in Kiev. I don't understand what logical leap you can make to do that.
Wait, who are we talking about there? What?
I'm sorry.
I'm just, in case I'm not the only one, what are we talking about there?
Oh, in 2013, 2014, another what they call color revolutions. There are these uprisings that are engineered. It's the U.S. intelligence. People say CIA, me too, colloquially, really. But whatever it is a construct of intelligence agencies, military assets, politicians, public relations, media outlets, etc., that engineer government changes, regime changes, through a particular formula. You gather people in the streets, you try to hold some government buildings, and then the world takes notice. The police sometimes shoot somebody, or somebody gets hurt or falls off a car or something and breaks their neck or whatever. This is evidence of the repressive nature of the dictators who run the country, and consequently, something has to be done. Well, sometimes that something is a direct U.S. intervention in the forms of sending those friendly guys collecting flowers, the U.S. military. Sometimes it's a couple of cruise missiles fired into the central government buildings. Sometimes it's Victoria Nuland working for the State Department, as happened in Kiev, going with John McCain and some others, handing out cookies to protesters in the middle of the capital of the country, and engineering a takeover, assisting, arming some groups inside the country, doing things that will advance what's perceived to be the geopolitical interests of the United States. In the case of Ukraine, for example, Ukraine bordering Russia on the south, being one further point of encirclement for the U.S. military of Russia. So what happened in 2014 was the elected president was driven from office under threat of a lynching, literally, and a government was installed. The United States representative to Ukraine, Jeffrey Pyatt, and the East European Affairs head of the State Department, Victoria Nuland, had their phone call intercepted where they were picking the new officials for the new government, the head of the government and the senior officials. This was entirely done by the United States, throwing out Viktor Yanukovych, the elected president, into exile. And the people that took power are actual Nazi. They are adherents to a cult, basically, that is the remnants of the pro-Nazi groups that fought against the Soviet army in Ukraine during World War II, under a guy named, what's his name? Jesus, I have Stepan Banderas.
Mm.
Yeah, actual Nazis. So in Africa, we're talking about AFRICOM. www.africom.mil, M-I-L, as in military. That is a the African command of the U.S. military, of the Pentagon, they are now in a position of command and control of the armies of 36 African nations, I think it is now. When Barack Obama came into office, they had none. It was this command was created. Finally, the final ink dried in October of 2008, right before the election, but entirely put together by Obama. And it was in the wake of the destruction of Libya, because Libya was the primary engine behind Pan-Africanism in Africa. They were financing Pan-Africanist projects and African unity projects, and they were about to finance an Pan-African currency. And Gaddafi would fund whatever forces were necessary to keep the African governments from handing over Africa to the United States. So that's why,
as you say, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm just looking at the news on AFRICOM.mil, and I'm wondering what a still alive and thriving Gaddafi would think about a U.S. Army led special purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force Crisis Response Africa Group.
Right. Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
What does a sovereign redistributionist leader feel about I mean, I've even shared this with some of my students, asking, just even how would they feel, or how do you think they would be encouraged to feel by their nightly news if a Russian-led crisis task force was housed in Maine, or even in Vancouver? I mean, anyway, I mean, it's just crazy what anyway, but anyway, I appreciate your response. I just wanted to have you at least talk a little bit about why an international focus, if not internationalist politics, are important. No, I appreciate that. I mean, I think what you did was great, and it provides a good example. But and I didn't mean to cut you off, so please continue. I just was looking at some of these headlines, thinking, what would Gaddafi be thinking about this?
To be reminded of the topic I'm supposed to be talking about too, because I tend to get lost in some of this stuff. There's just so much of it to communicate. So people here that if they were aware of the fact that these things happened, now all of a sudden when Hillary Clinton comes to you and says, "Hi, I need to save you from white supremacy," it rings differently. It's like, well, really? Do me a favor then, leave. That would be the way you could do it. Mm-hmm. This is, the cabal that construct. She was a Secretary of State when this happened. She was Secretary of State for the Libyan War and for Cote d'Ivoire. I mean, not for nothing. It's a little bit more detail. France didn't only, France was was the imperial power in North and West Africa. Mm-hmm. And, they were kicked out in various ways to various degrees, with the liberation movements of the 50s and 60s and 70s. One of the things that was not kicked out was France's control over the currencies of a lot of these countries. They still used the French franc as a currency. And they still used it even after France stopped using it, because they were using euros. And Gbagbo in Cote d'Ivoire, on the Ivory Coast, announced, and he was assembling some of the other French colonies at the time, that
similar to what Gaddafi was arguing in Libya, by the way, in terms of where you're headed. Yeah,
that's right. A major marker of our sovereignty and our right to self-determination, an actual practice of self-determination, is printing our own currency. And so we're going to start doing it. And Libya, Gaddafi was saying, cool, well, you know what? If you want to have that be stable against international markets, one good thing to use as a backing is gold, and we got all gold you want. So we can get busy on this. So, so Gbagbo, that was the big offense that required him to come in. Not for nothing, the guy that they replaced him with had been head of the IMF for a while.
Oh, it's always helpful.
The IMF.
That's helpful.
Oh, yeah. So Ouattara. So, but you saw, and you're still seeing pressure on Algeria, but you saw Mali and Tunisia. All of these are and coming down. They've been fighting in a couple of the other countries around Ivory Coast, where the colonial forces are reasserting themselves and taking direct control. This is one of the things, for example, when we're looking at domestic politics, and people are talking about the Trumpism and whatever, the rise of nationalism and authoritarian governments. In a large view of history, nationalism is a feature of the earlier epics and not one of socialist or communist epics. Supposedly, that's what we've been taught, and it makes sense. We're a class across national boundaries. Okay, we're one working class and in control of our own fate. But the thing is that when your country and other countries are all being owned by, when the only transnational class allowed to exist is the exploiting class, and they knock down national sovereignty to facilitate their exploitation, then nationalism is not a reactionary force, but rather a revolutionary one. The nationalists should be supported in order to break the back of the international capitalist class. People have to understand that. And if they don't understand what's going on in the world in the first place, then they don't understand the characterizations of it as relates to their own world. I don't know if I said that very clearly.
I think so. But like I always like to point out, again, relatively, and I don't mean to say this in any disparaging way, but our relatively small but thoughtful audience will catch it and raise some questions if you didn't say it clearly, or if they need an elaboration. So I think so again, as I right on time, Sister Ricky is, and if she thinks it's clear, it's clear. So but one other question I want to make sure I raise with you before I think we have to start heading towards a close is that I forgot to bring up earlier, is on this question of censorship, journalism and media censorship. I wanted you to, and also was a nice segue to talk about what's happening now post this last election. I do want to hear what you think about post Biden Harris's election, and maybe what some think is going to happen as this new bright day has taken effect. But as it relates, and your analysis of that, as it also relates to your own work journalistically suffering another I want to say sensorial. Is that a word? Sensorial defeat, a censorship defeat. So both talk about what happened with this censorship, but also obviously in the context of your analysis of post Biden Harris, or the election of Biden Harris.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with this at 2016. Going to both conventions, the Republican and Democratic conventions, with a friend, someone we both know. And in Cleveland, if you'll recall, everyone was saying that they were going to shut down the RNC, that the Republican Party was hugely divided. They tried out Mitt Romney and Ted Cruz at the time, a few others, that Trump was a divisive figure, and they'll be lucky if they get through the convention. There's no way in hell he's going to be elected. And never mind, the left was thumping their chest and they were going to shut down the RNC. Was never going to even happen. When I got there, and as a matter of fact, it was like a celebration more than anything. First of all, there was no protest. I saw one protest, and I didn't really see much of it, as opposed to every convention I've gone to where, you have to stay away from this part of town or there because there's thousands of people in the street and you get stuck for an hour or whatever. Nothing, except for this guy from the RCP that was trying to burn a flag and lit himself on fire. That was it. Otherwise, there was nothing. And I had asked I met a cabbie the first night that we were there, who's a guy with 3 PhDs, history, political science, philosophy, I think. Some brilliant at. And that's like the best job. The cab job was like the best job he got in Cleveland. That's how bad Cleveland is right now. I said, where's the protests? He said, are you kidding me? He said, he took me on a ride. And around the city, in the way that the Hudson River frames New York City, Hudson and East River, the backdrop there, like the Pacific and the Palisades, do with LA or, California. There, they have the factories that people used to work in that are vacant and abandoned, and they surround the city. And the people there are almost, their unemployment is like ridiculous. They're in foreclosure. The kids are on drugs. There's no hope, nothing. He said, one guy out of everybody said, I'm going to get you a job. He said, no, whether he's going to do it or not, or whatever, he's the only guy that even said it. They're not going to protest. No matter who comes to town and asks them or hands them a flyer or whatever, they're not going to protest. And that's what happened. There were none. At the convention, I interviewed maybe 100 people. Not a one of them had a problem with Trump being their thing. When we got to Philadelphia, the people were in the street all over the place. And every day, half the people would walk out of the convention, the Sanders delegates, and they start walking you're inside a basketball stadium. So you've got the aisles where the vendors and the bathrooms and everything are. That's where the media was set up. And, they'd come out there, 1,000 of them, 2,000, 3,000. Hey, DNC, we won't vote for Hillary, all of this stuff. None of it got any coverage. None. The TV show for the convention in Cleveland compared to the TV show for the convention in Philadelphia, they could have been switched and they would have represented what was happening on the ground better. So I know what these things look like and how people cover them, including Pacifica, who did not want, what the hell's his name from LA? There's a guy from LA, Alan, whatever. When the first group of protesters busted out, I ran down to him and I said, these people are walking out of the convention, the Sanders delegates, and they want to talk to somebody. They were busy with interviews, softball interviews. Well, don't you think it's really significant that we're going to finally have the first woman president? Oh, yes, things will be so much better, et cetera, going on. He doesn't want to do this. Only way I got them on the air, I had them come down to the studio area where they were set up. And they were chanting and overdriving the microphone, so they had to put them on the air. Nobody wanted to cover it. When this election happened, we saw 4 years of the media moving from as bad as it was in 2016 to where they editorialize in the headlines now. Mm-hmm. For example, if Trump says something, they can't say Trump claims moon men landed. They have to say Trump falsely claims moon men landed. And they can't leave you to read the article and then to read an article with a photograph of a moon man or whatever and let you make up your own mind. No,
Twitter even asks me, or Facebook asks me if I want to read what I'm about to share, just in case, like I'm good. I'm good, Jack Dorsey or whoever. I don't need you to check for me.
Thank you.
Or, I'm all right.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't know how to read. And if I didn't know how to read, I wouldn't be looking at it. Yeah.
And if I'm wrong, or if what I'm tweeting is wrong, it's wrong. And
Right.
somebody, I mean, let it be wrong. I mean,
Right.
whatever. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, over the course of this, it was at the conventions back in 2016. I'm doing a 30-minute newscast 5 days a week, free. Nobody's paying me. Some people that contribute money, I would say the funds I get are on the order of $2,500 a year. Okay. I mean, it cost me that for electricity to do this stuff. So I'm not looking to cash in here. One radio station, WFHB in Bloomington, Indiana, said that I was covering Trump too favorably, and that, and this is in the context of everybody saying that he's a misogynist, Nazi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What I was doing was like taking excerpts of his speeches that were larger than the ones that were being used in the media, and pointing out that, like, well, what you're being fed right now isn't exactly true because there's this. Talking with people who had a variety of opinions on all of the candidates, including people who were very critical of, Hillary Clinton at that time and this time of Biden, over the things that they've done, over their record. And so they dropped me from WFHB. And over the last 4 years, I got dropped from maybe 24 radio stations over the same complaint that there was an ideological problem. And finally, KGNU in Denver, that happened maybe in early December, because I was covering the details of the claims over the election being stolen, quote unquote, rather than saying Trump falsely claims election was stolen. I was saying Trump claims election was stolen because these 4 states changed the method of voting without an act of the legislature, and their claim is that under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution, has to be act of the state legislature that sets the climate for the vote, etc. I was providing detail, in other words, that ran counter to the narrative. The narrative was so childish, infantile, and facially wrong, but no one was covering any of the details at all anywhere. So almost nobody knew it, and half the population, the way people are polarized now, won't look at it anyway. If you told them the election was stolen, half of the half, I would guess, would say good, as long as we got rid of that guy. So I was told I'm not supposed to be doing this anymore. Our mission statement is not what you're doing. And I don't know what your mission statement is. I know the one I read, and the one I read says that you're trying to bring accurate information to people and a diversity of opinions. So,
well, look, I mean, when last year the Pew Research Center came out with the study that showed that both Fox and MSNBC and CNN basically have, that is Fox and then MSNBC and CNN both basically have, Fox actually has a slightly more diverse, if comparing between Democrat and Republican audience.
Yeah.
It was like 90% of their audience was Republican, and 95% of CNN and MSNBC's audience is Democrat. Right. When you see that, and then by the way, and I just watched it with my daughters yesterday, which for me was a several time viewing of the Michael Moore produced Planet of the Humans documentary about climate change. So in other words, the parallel I'm drawing is that if you want to know why Democracy Now's if you want to know where Democracy Now's limitations are set, you can say that 95% of their audience is in favor of the dominant mainstream and their funders, the mainstream environmentalist movement. So Planet of the Humans, even though it's produced by their former friend Michael Moore, gets hated on that platform, and they don't ever have a debate. They don't discuss the film because it's critical of the mainstream environmentalist movement. So same thing with CNN and MSNBC. With the Democrats, they're not going to have anything that's critical of the Democratic Party. Same thing with Fox and the Republicans, and much of the subsidiary presses across the country follow suit. So it makes sense that if your programs or if these stations are targeting a Democratic Party audience, and of course Democratic Party funding,
right?
So I mean, it's crazy how this stuff, anyway. But listen, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. I want to thank you very much for coming through. And if there's any last comment you want to make, a closing comment, please do. And of course, let us know again where folks can find your reporting, and we'll have to do this again at some point. But anyway, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, first, I mean, you nailed it in that last little piece you just said. I mean, essentially, it's a structural problem. You can look at people's 990s, their IRS filing forms. You go to guidestar.com and guidestar.org, one of those. You can look at these nonprofits like Democracy Now! And others at their tax returns, and they'll show you the sources of funds. And the sources of funds definitely correlate. Okay, I don't know what the mechanics are, but this money, income, output, that style of news, period. And that's a dangerous thing for us. You can find me, let's see, on the Facebook, Don DeBar, and that links to everything else. I'm still there today. Who knows what's going to happen in the near future. I'm also on vk.com, which is a Russian version of Facebook in English.
Wow, we're definitely going to get censored now that you said that nonsense.
Yeah. And, CPRnews.podbean.com is where the newscast is. And I've been on vacation until a week from Monday. We'll be back on the 15th.
All right on. And we link to that down in the description. We'll link to it at imixwhatilike.org as well. And it is guidestar.org. If people want to, I just showed it very quickly, if people want to look up those nonprofit numbers. But Don DeBar, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I appreciate you. And we'll catch you again another time, man. Thank you for your work. Appreciate you.
Brother, thank you very much for your work too. Thanks.
All right. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me so far this morning. Please like, share, subscribe, hit the member join button if you can, and help this channel as it continues to expand, and beyond this channel too, by the way. Come on back in about 30 minutes, 12 noon Eastern, for really a continuation of this of this discussion. If as I at least agree with Don DeBar that our politics and our news needs to be international. Our next guest, V Bravo, talking about Chilean history and what's going on right now in terms of their uprisings and the continuation of their revolutionary struggle, and how it relates to what's happening here, given that his work has been extensive throughout New York, the United States, the hip hop community, and beyond. It's a perfect segue to this. And then, of course, 5 p.m. Eastern tonight, the first jumping off point of the Black Studies Matters series with Doctors Iyile Ichile and Keto Swan, right back here at this channel. So a lot going on here today. Don't go anywhere, or at least go somewhere and come back and join us later on if you can. Thanks to everybody that came through for the lively conversation. Absolutely. And the chat, and we will see you all on the next edition of I Mix What I Like Live, right back here in about 30 minutes, as I said. So peace, everybody, as Fred Hampton used to say, if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Catch you next time.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like.